Rates just dropped 25 basis points, and the dot plot is looking dovish. One governor even suggested 5 more cuts. Can you believe it? Powell insists the Fed isn't political, but did you catch those job revisions? Stay tuned to see what he really admitted between the lines.
The Fed cut, everyone knows that, or I'm sure most people knew that. If you didn't, go look it up. Fed cuts rates recently. I start reading up on that. Gary, I'm going to turn it over right to you. You can let the people know what they need to know. Number one, Federal Reserve as expected is our headline.
Yeah, so the Federal Reserve concluded its September meeting last Wednesday. They surprised nobody. They cut by 25 basis points, just a fancy finance way of saying 1/4%. All Fed governors but one agreed on the 25 basis point cut. That included Lisa Cook. She's the one that President Trump is trying to remove from mortgage fraud or alleged mortgage fraud. There's some really interesting back and forth on that. One thing, Rob, that I thought was really interesting was I read a newspaper article this morning saying the Fed had established its independence from President Trump because they only voted for a 25 basis point cut. And I'm thinking to myself, this is the same Federal Reserve where we almost never have anybody objecting. They all vote unanimously. In this case, the vote was 11-1, with only Stephen Miran voting for a 50 basis point cut. I mean, that you're establishing your independence by all doing the same thing. There is literally no independent thought on the Federal Reserve. It was news one meeting ago when they had 2 objections. So the vote was 10-2, with 10 voting for no cuts and 2 voting for a 25 basis point cut, right? That was the big kerfuffle, that all of a sudden 2 people had said, wait, we actually want the smallest cut possible, right? I mean, that's the great independence of the Fed. The fact is the Federal Reserve has never been independent. It wasn't independent at its creation, where the Secretary of the Treasury was actually the Fed chairman. And we've gone through this. I've gone through this on this show. We just put out a big macro piece last week where in it I devote pages to talking about all of the political interactions. My favorite, it's kind of obscene, but President Lyndon Johnson literally picked up Fed Chairman Arthur Burns and slammed him into a wall, literally strong-arming him into lower rates, right? But the Fed is independent. The Fed has never been independent, and they don't act independent. So I thought that was kind of ridiculous. It was Miran who voted for the 50 basis point cut. Okay, this much above everybody else. The one thing I thought was really interesting, Rob, is the dot plot was 25 basis points more dovish than before. Just a fancy finance way of saying that before the Fed had expected to cut 50 basis points, 0.5% for the rest of the year. It turns out now they're saying, well, 75 basis points.
Yeah.
So, okay, the dot plot, a little bit more dovish. And I'm going to point out here that while the Fed is focused on employment, which fine, they're entitled to do that, the CPI is about 50% above the made up 2% target. It's been above target since 2021. The labor market isn't actually out of balance yet. So, that's why, again, for the second time on the show, the DKI portfolio is positioned for higher long-term inflation. Because these guys are cutting rates into too high inflation and an employment market that's not in bad shape.
Yeah, it's just it's a mess in general, and of course, Gary, you're describing the Fed just seems like bizarro world, which makes sense when you're talking about what seems to be these just whether it's political entity, right? This independent thinking firm, like you're saying, but then everybody's doing the exact same thing. So, like, that's where the press is claiming that Miran here is a political actor. I mean, is that the case? Can he be that political actor that the press is potentially claiming?
So really interesting. And I thought this was, Rob, it was one of Chairman Powell's best moments in his press conference. During the press conference, the press, showing how independent they are, found 17 different ways to ask Chairman Powell, hey, do you think the Fed has been politicized? Do you think the BLS has been politicized? Well, these institutions have always been political. They just don't like it because it's President Trump who's now calling the shots. And you know what? Like, if you want to tell me President Trump shouldn't be calling shots, hey, I agree with you, but the Fed has been political since the beginning. So here we are. My solution to all of this is just end the Fed and let the bond market set the overnight rate, and that would solve it. But where I thought Powell was particularly persuasive, he got asked the 17th question on this, and someone said, hey, Moran's a political actor. Okay, fair enough. But what Chairman Powell said is that Governor Moran can't tell the other governors to obey President Trump's wishes. The only thing he can do is try to persuade them that lower rates are the best course of action. And you know what? That's a great point. In this case, Moran wanted a 50 basis point cut. The other 11 governors wanted a 25 basis point cut. Let's not act like that's such a gigantic difference of opinions. Let's not act like the entire Fed isn't heading for more inflation anyway. But the point of all this is Moran tried to convince the others to go for 50 basis points, and he failed. 11 of them said, no, we want the smaller cut. And that's all he could do. He can't go into that room and scream, President Trump wants X. And they're okay, well, the president wants it. It doesn't work. He's got to convince 11 other people to agree with him. In this case, he didn't. And that's fine. I think that was the right move. I don't think they should have had the bigger cut. So this is a situation where the system worked as it should.
Gary, with Chairman Powell and obviously Trump, we know the memes and the battles that they've had. But I mean, in this case, didn't he kind of in a way accidentally endorse Trump, President Trump's criticism of him, the BLS in a roundabout way?
Yeah, and this I thought was fascinating. So during the press conference, Chairman Powell cited recent downward job revisions as one main reason the Fed decided to end the pause and lower the Fed funds rate. Okay, fair enough. Um, and this is something we've been talking about here on the Five Things. And again, in the big macro piece that we put out on Monday, if you want to read it, go to the DKI website, click the research tab. It's not paywall. You're welcome to read it, forward it to people. Um, and we talked about this, how the Bureau of Labor Statistics keeps having these jumbo revisions and they're always downwards, right? And
Yep.
so the whole point of this is Powell is saying these jobs revisions are one reason the Fed decided to end the pause. Well, guess what? President Trump has been saying that
Yeah.
Powell is late, should have lowered sooner, and that the Bureau of Labor Statistics hurt him politically with data that prevented like this
Yeah.
is exactly what the president said. He
Right.
said that the BLS, if they had given accurate data, it would have been better for him politically, and the Fed would have lowered sooner, and that Powell is late. This is why Powell admitted this in a press conference. I don't know, but this is exactly President Trump's point. Now,
Well, I
I'm
mean,
going to for the
at some point, Gary. I mean, at some point, Gary, the facts become the facts, right? And the things that we've been talking about and saying are the actual case, right? It just becomes so clear and evident.
Yeah, and the thing is, for the people watching this, I actually don't agree with President Trump. I don't think the BLS was a political actor here. I think they've been horrible. I think they have bad
Yeah.
data, but I don't think they were trying to hurt him politically.
Right.
And then on top of that, I don't think Powell was late, and I don't think the Fed should have cut.
And
So
and, and
in
Gary,
this
wouldn't
situation,
yes, sorry, wouldn't part of it be too that at the time, right, we were getting those bifurcated stats, right, on this
yeah,
economy, and we had these overinflated jobs reports, and you and I started looking at them, or you look at you reading deep in the weeds, right, of hey, all these jobs that are being baked into these reports, they're not private sector jobs. They're just government jobs.
yeah.
Dig holes, fill holes.
Yeah, exactly. And a big part of the recent weakness in the job market has been a reduction in the number of government jobs. These aren't productive jobs, right? This is just the government is going to be a tiny bit smaller. That's, that part is perfectly fine. That's not a bad thing. And, it's true that the number of jobs available has come down, but repatriations have meant that the number of people looking for jobs has come down. So the labor market has been basically in balance. And so, in my opinion, all parties in this drama, President Trump, Chairman Powell, Governor Moran, and the former head of the BLS, McIntyre, all share blame for bad policy.
Yeah, no doubt. Great coverage there, Gary. And again, you can head to deepknowledgeinvesting.com. Gary just dropped a huge macro report last Monday. Head to the research tab. You'll be able to access that free of charge. No paywall there.